December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The United States was thrust into the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. Over the next 4 years, 16 million American men and women would serve in uniform, fighting across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. They carried rifles, ammunition, medical supplies, letters from home, and photographs of loved ones. But there was something else, something that traveled with every unit, on every ship, to every battlefield. Something that became as essential to the war effort as bullets and bandages. Coffee, a simple beverage that became the lifeblood of the American military machine. This is the story of how a cup of joe helped win World War II. America's coffee culture before the war. To understand coffee's role in World War II, we must first understand America's relationship with coffee in the years leading up to the war. By the 1930s, coffee had become deeply embedded in American daily life. It wasn't just a morning ritual. It was a social institution. Coffee breaks at work. Coffee after church. Coffee with neighbors. The average American consumed around 13 pounds of coffee per year. Diners and restaurants served it endlessly, with free refills becoming an American hallmark. Major brands dominated the market. Maxwell House's slogan, "Good to the last drop," had been around since 1915. Chase and Sanborn advertised heavily on radio programs, while Folgers expanded its reach from the West Coast. But coffee was still primarily brewed fresh, from ground beans. It took time. It required equipment, and it produced waste, used grounds and filters. The coffee industry was massive, importing beans primarily from Brazil and Colombia. American ports in New York, New Orleans, and San Francisco received shipments of green coffee beans that would be roasted domestically. The industry employed hundreds of thousands of workers, from dock workers to roasters to retailers. Coffee houses dotted city streets, and corner grocers sold beans by the pound. Coffee percolators became standard household items. The electric percolator, invented in the early 1900s, had become common in American kitchens by the 1930s. Families gathered around breakfast tables each morning, the smell of percolating coffee signaling the start of a new day. The Great Depression had hit the coffee industry hard. Prices plummeted as supply exceeded demand. Brazil, the world's largest coffee producer, faced economic catastrophe as coffee prices collapsed. Consumption dropped as families tightened their belts. But even during the hardest times, most Americans found a way to afford their daily coffee. It was a small comfort, an affordable luxury that provided a moment of warmth in difficult times. Coffee was also deeply connected to American work culture. Factory workers took coffee breaks to rest during long shifts. Office workers gathered around coffee pots to discuss business and share gossip. The coffee break became an unofficial but recognized part of the American workday, a tradition that would only strengthen during and after the war. As the 1930s progressed and war clouds gathered over Europe and Asia, few Americans could have imagined how central coffee would become to the coming conflict. But military planners were already thinking about it. The United States military had learned lessons from World War I. They understood that modern warfare required not just weapons and tactics, but attention to the psychological and physical needs of soldiers. Morale wasn't just important, it was strategic, and nothing boosted morale quite like coffee. During the First World War, American doughboys had received coffee as part of their rations, but the quality and consistency varied wildly. Sometimes they had fresh brewed coffee from field kitchens. Other times they went days without any. Military planners determined this would not happen again. Coffee becomes a weapon of war. When America entered World War II, the military mobilization was unprecedented. 16 million Americans would serve. They would need to be fed, clothed, equipped, and caffeinated. The Quartermaster Corps faced an enormous challenge. How do you supply a global military force spanning multiple continents and oceans? Food rations were carefully calculated for nutritional value, shelf life, and weight. And coffee was considered essential. In 1942, the military established standard ration allowances. Each soldier was allocated approximately 32 pounds of coffee per year. That works out to roughly 2 cups per day, more than double what many civilians could access under wartime rationing. Coffee appeared in various forms in military rations. C rations, designed for frontline troops, included soluble coffee powder. K rations, lighter emergency rations for paratroopers and special forces, also contained instant coffee packets. The D ration, an emergency chocolate bar ration, was often consumed with coffee when available. But the military needed more than just traditional ground coffee. They needed something revolutionary. Enter instant coffee, a technology that had existed since the early 1900s, but had never achieved commercial success. The Japanese-American chemist Satoru Kato had invented the first instant coffee process in 1901, and George Constant Lewis Washington had created the first mass-produced instant coffee in 1910. His ready coffee saw some use during World War I, but the quality was poor and acceptance limited. But it was Nestlé, working with the Brazilian government to address a coffee surplus in the 1930s, that perfected a spray drying process that created Nescafé in 1938. This instant coffee actually tasted like coffee, dissolved quickly in hot water, and remained stable for months. When war broke out, the U.S. military recognized instant coffee's potential immediately. It was lightweight, reducing shipping costs and cargo space. It was shelf-stable, surviving temperature extremes and rough handling. It required only hot water, and soldiers could make it anywhere, anytime. No coffee pots, no filters, no complex preparation. By 1942, nearly the entire output of Nescafé's American production was diverted to military use. The company built new factories and expanded production capacity. Other manufacturers followed suit. Maxwell House, Folgers, and smaller companies all began producing instant coffee for the military. The government provided funding and priority access to raw materials. Coffee manufacturing became part of the defense industry. Workers in coffee plants were sometimes exempt from the draft because their work was deemed essential to the war effort. The numbers were staggering. By 1945, American forces were consuming over 250 million pounds of coffee annually. Much of it was instant. To put this in perspective, that's enough coffee to fill approximately 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Soldiers learned to make coffee in every conceivable situation: in foxholes during brief lulls in combat, on the decks of ships crossing the Atlantic and Pacific, in field hospitals, in mess tents behind the lines, even in the freezing conditions of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge. Some soldiers carried small, solid fuel tablets specifically for heating water for coffee. These tablets, called heat tabs, burned hot enough to boil water in a canteen cup in just a few minutes. Others improvised, using gasoline, engine heat, or whatever fuel they could find. Resourceful soldiers learned to heat water using the engine manifolds of jeeps and trucks. Private First Class John Henderson, who served with the 101st Airborne, later recalled, "Coffee was more important than sleep sometimes. You could go without sleep if you had coffee. It kept you alert, kept you warm, and reminded you of home. A cup of coffee made you feel human again." The military also developed specialized equipment for coffee preparation. Large-capacity coffee makers capable of brewing dozens of gallons at once were standard in mess halls and field kitchens. These industrial brewers could serve hundreds of soldiers at mealtimes, ensuring everyone got their daily ration. The logistics of caffeination, delivering coffee to millions of soldiers scattered across the globe, was a logistical nightmare that required the same careful planning as ammunition and medical supplies. Consider the scale. American forces operated in Alaska and Australia, in North Africa and Normandy, in the Philippines and Italy. Each theater of operations required its own supply chain, and coffee had to flow through all of them. The Atlantic crossing was particularly dangerous. German U-boats prowled shipping lanes, hunting Allied convoys. Yet supply ships carried coffee alongside tanks, jeeps, and artillery shells. Coffee was classified as an essential supply. Losing it meant more than inconvenience. It meant a measurable drop in combat effectiveness. During the height of the Battle of the Atlantic, German submarines sank thousands of Allied ships. Among the cargo lost were tons of coffee destined for troops in Europe and North Africa. The Navy assigned destroyers and corvettes to protect supply convoys, understanding that maintaining supply lines meant maintaining military capability. The Pacific presented different challenges. The vast distances between islands meant supply lines stretched thousands of miles. Ships had to navigate treacherous waters, avoid Japanese submarines, and deal with tropical conditions that could spoil improperly stored supplies. But instant coffee's durability made it ideal for these conditions. Unlike fresh brewed coffee, which required careful storage and quick consumption, instant coffee could survive months in transport, endure temperature extremes, and remain drinkable even after rough handling. Sealed in waterproof containers, instant coffee survived everything from tropical humidity to Arctic cold. Quartermaster units established massive supply depots. In England, preparations for D-Day included stockpiling millions of pounds of coffee for the invasion force. In the Pacific, island supply bases maintained coffee reserves alongside ammunition dumps. These depots operated around the clock, receiving shipments from the United States and distributing them to frontline units. Supply sergeants became experts in coffee logistics. They tracked consumption rates, anticipated needs, and ensured continuous supply. Running out of coffee was considered a serious failure that could damage unit morale and combat readiness. Each branch of service had its own coffee culture and challenges. The Navy, with its tradition of continuous coffee availability, maintained coffee pots in ready rooms and mess decks. Sailors could grab coffee during watch changes, before missions, after battle stations. The smell of coffee permeated every ship, from aircraft carriers to destroyers. Navy coffee was notoriously strong, brewed to stay hot for hours and provide maximum caffeine. Submarine crews developed their own coffee rituals. On long patrols lasting weeks or months, coffee marked the passage of time. Fresh coffee beans sometimes replaced instant coffee on submarines, providing a psychological boost. The smell of freshly ground coffee in the confined space of a submarine reminded sailors of home and normalcy. The Army, spread across diverse environments, adapted coffee preparation to local conditions. In the European theater, units sometimes acquired local coffee from liberated towns. French cafes occasionally hosted American soldiers, serving European-style coffee that tasted dramatically different from American brew. In North Africa, soldiers dealt with sand getting into everything, including their coffee. Drinking gritty coffee became so common that soldiers joked about extra body. The Army Air Forces faced unique challenges. Bomber crews flying missions over Germany or Japan needed coffee before pre-dawn briefings. They couldn't brew it at 20,000 feet, but they could carry thermoses filled before takeoff. Ground crews maintained coffee stations near aircraft, ensuring pilots and crews could grab coffee before climbing into their planes. Fighter pilots developed superstitions around coffee. Some refused to fly without their morning cup. Others drank specific amounts before missions, believing it brought good luck. These rituals, whether based on caffeine needs or psychological comfort, became part of air combat culture. Marines in the Pacific developed their own methods. On islands like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, coffee preparation often happened under fire. Heating water meant exposing your position, but the risk was often deemed worthwhile. Marines learned to heat water quickly, make coffee fast, and move on before Japanese artillery could target the smoke. The military even produced training materials on proper coffee preparation. Field manuals detailed how to make coffee for large groups, how to maintain equipment, and how to maximize flavor with limited supplies. One manual instructed, "Coffee should be made fresh for each meal when possible. Use 1 pound of coffee for every 2 gallons of water. Bring water to a rolling boil before adding coffee. Steep for 5 minutes, then add cold water to settle the grounds." Of course, frontline soldiers rarely had the luxury of following such precise instructions. More often, they dumped instant coffee into lukewarm water and drank it quickly before moving out. Coffee and morale. But coffee's importance went far beyond caffeine and alertness. It became a ritual, a reminder of home, and a source of comfort in the chaos of war. Think about what coffee represented. In civilian life, coffee meant morning routines, family breakfasts, breaks at work, conversations with friends. It was normalcy, routine, civilization. Coffee connected people to peacetime memories and pre-war lives. In combat zones, those same rituals persisted. Soldiers would gather around a field stove during lulls in fighting. They'd share coffee from their canteens. They'd talk about home, about plans after the war, about anything except the immediate dangers surrounding them. These moments of shared coffee created bonds. The buddy who shared his last coffee packet. The sergeant who made sure everyone got a cup before heading into battle. The medic who brought coffee to wounded men. These small acts of generosity and care built the camaraderie that held units together through terrible ordeals. Coffee also served as informal currency. Soldiers traded coffee for fresh eggs from local farmers. They exchanged it for cigarettes, chocolate, or other desired items. A soldier with extra coffee had social capital, able to make friends and secure favors. Letters home frequently mentioned coffee. Soldiers wrote about missing fresh coffee, about the taste of instant coffee, about coffee rituals that reminded them of home. These letters provide intimate glimpses into how coffee shaped daily life in combat zones. Private Robert Chen wrote to his family in San Francisco, "The coffee here isn't like Mom's, but when I drink it, I close my eyes and pretend I'm back at the kitchen table. It helps." Sergeant William Thompson wrote to his wife, "We got fresh coffee supplies today. You'd think we'd won the war the way everyone celebrated. It's funny how something so simple can mean so much out here." Corporal James Martinez wrote to his sister, "I dream about your coffee sometimes. Remember how you'd make it every Sunday morning? I'd give anything for a cup of that right now. The stuff we have here tastes like motor oil, but it's better than nothing." Coffee also featured in morale-boosting programs. USO shows often included coffee service. Red Cross volunteers, including the famous Donut Dollies, served coffee and donuts to troops. These women, operating in dangerous conditions, became beloved figures, bringing a taste of home to the front lines. The Red Cross established clubs and canteens wherever American troops gathered. These facilities, from London to Casablanca to Manila, always featured coffee service. Soldiers could relax, read newspapers from home, write letters, and drink unlimited coffee. These spaces provided psychological refuge from the stress of combat. Coffee even appeared in the cultural symbols of the war. Pin-up girls were photographed with coffee cups. Popular songs referenced "a cup of joe." The phrase itself, "cup of joe," became indelibly linked with military culture. The origin of cup of joe is debated. Some attribute it to Navy Secretary Josephus Daniels, who banned alcohol on Navy ships in 1914, making coffee the strongest drink available. Others suggest it derives from jamoke, a blend of Java and mocha. Still others believe it simply comes from Joe as slang for an ordinary fellow, making it the ordinary man's drink. Regardless of its etymology, by World War II, Joe was synonymous with military coffee. Military newspapers like Stars and Stripes ran cartoons and jokes about coffee. Bill Mauldin's famous Willie and Joe characters were often depicted with coffee cups, using dark humor to illustrate the absurdities of war. The humor was sometimes grim, jokes about coffee that could strip paint, wake the dead, or dissolve spoons, but it reflected coffee's central role in military life. Soldiers created their own slang around coffee. Java referenced the Indonesian island that produced coffee. Mud described particularly thick or strong coffee. Battery acid was the term for coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. This colorful language showed how deeply coffee was woven into military vocabulary. Even in medical settings, coffee played a role. Field hospitals served coffee to wounded soldiers. Medics understood that beyond its stimulant properties, coffee provided psychological comfort. A cup of coffee told a wounded soldier he was safe, cared for, still alive. Nurses and doctors relied on coffee too, working long hours under terrible conditions. Surgical teams preparing for mass casualties would drink coffee to stay alert during marathon sessions. After D-Day, medical personnel in Normandy worked 36-hour shifts treating casualties, sustained by coffee and determination. Dr. Sarah Klein, an Army nurse who served in field hospitals in France, remembered, "We'd give recovering patients coffee as soon as they could swallow. It wasn't just about the caffeine, it was symbolic. Coffee meant life was continuing. It meant they were going to be okay." Chaplains used coffee as a tool for pastoral care. After traumatic events, chaplains would sit with soldiers over coffee, providing a non-threatening environment for talking through experiences. The simple act of sharing coffee created space for emotional processing and spiritual support. The home front sacrifice. While soldiers abroad received priority coffee supplies, Americans at home faced a different reality: rationing. On November 29, 1942, coffee became the first food item rationed in the United States. Every American over the age of 15 received a ration book, limiting them to 1 pound of coffee every 5 weeks, roughly half their pre-war consumption. The announcement shocked many Americans. Coffee seemed as American as apple pie, and restricting it felt like a significant sacrifice. But government officials explained clearly. Soldiers needed coffee to fight effectively, and civilian sacrifice meant military success. The rationing system used stamps. Each person received Stamp 27 in their War Ration Book 1, good for 1 pound of coffee. When that was used, they had to wait 5 weeks for the next stamp. Families had to plan carefully, making their monthly coffee ration last. For a nation accustomed to unlimited coffee, this was a genuine sacrifice. Coffee breaks at factories continued, but with smaller portions. Restaurants and diners stretched their supplies by serving weaker coffee or offering refills that were mostly hot water. Some establishments posted signs apologizing for weak coffee, explaining they were supporting our boys overseas. The government launched public relations campaigns explaining the rationing. Posters proclaimed, "Do with less so they'll have enough." Images showed soldiers in combat alongside messages like, "He needs coffee more than you do." Movie theaters showed newsreels explaining how coffee helped troops fight more effectively. Most Americans accepted rationing willingly, understanding that every cup they gave up meant another cup for their sons, brothers, husbands, and fathers overseas. It was a tangible way to support the war effort, a daily reminder that everyone had a role to play in achieving victory. Women's groups organized coffee conservation campaigns. They shared recipes for stretching coffee, mixing it with chicory, reusing grounds, brewing it weaker. Some families saved their entire monthly ration to send packages to soldiers overseas, though this was technically against rationing rules. Cookbooks published during the war included sections on coffee economy. Tips included using less coffee per pot, reusing grounds for a second weaker brew, and adding chicory root to extend supplies. Some suggested roasting grain or nuts to create coffee substitutes, though these rarely satisfied true coffee lovers. Black markets emerged, of course. Coffee became valuable enough to trade illegally. Rationing enforcement officers investigated hoarding and black market sales. Penalties for rationing violations included fines and even jail time. But most Americans played by the rules, viewing coffee rationing as their contribution to victory. Newspapers reported on black market busts, using them as cautionary tales. One headline read, "Coffee hoarder gets 6 months. Judge says greed hurts war effort." These stories reinforced social pressure to comply with rationing. Interestingly, war production workers in defense plants received extra coffee rations. The government recognized that workers building tanks, ships, and aircraft needed caffeine to maintain productivity during long shifts. This created some resentment, but most understood the logic. A well-caffeinated worker produced more weapons, which helped win the war. Coffee substitutes appeared on the market. Postum, a grain-based coffee substitute created in the 1890s, saw renewed popularity. Some companies marketed roasted grain beverages as coffee alternatives. Others sold chicory root, which had been mixed with coffee in New Orleans for decades, as a stretcher. But nothing truly replaced real coffee in the American palate. Coffee companies adapted their advertising. Rather than encouraging consumption, they ran patriotic campaigns. Maxwell House ads showed soldiers enjoying coffee with the tagline, "When our boys come home." Folgers emphasized quality over quantity, suggesting that rationed coffee should be the best available. Some companies, like Hills Brothers, devoted their entire production to military contracts, effectively disappearing from civilian markets for the duration of the war. This demonstrated corporate patriotism and reinforced the message that military needs came first. Families developed rituals around their rationed coffee. Some reserved Sunday morning coffee as a special family tradition, making it stretch through the week by drinking it only on weekends. Others divided their monthly ration equally, ensuring consistent daily consumption. These adaptations showed American ingenuity and commitment to supporting the war effort. Children learned lessons about sacrifice through coffee rationing. Families explained that going without coffee meant soldiers could stay alert and safe. This connected home front sacrifice directly to battlefield success. helping children understand their role in the war effort. Coffee in combat. Coffee wasn't just for rest periods and rear areas. It went into combat itself, and the stories soldiers told about coffee often took place during the fiercest fighting. June 6, 1944, D-Day. As Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, some of the first supplies brought ashore included coffee. Within hours of securing beachheads, soldiers were brewing coffee in shell craters and destroyed bunkers. Captain John Ramirez, who landed at Omaha Beach, later wrote, "After 18 hours of continuous fighting, someone got a fire going and made coffee. It was the worst coffee I ever tasted, full of sand, bitter as hell. But it was the best thing I'd ever drunk. We were still alive, and we had coffee. We were going to make it." In Italy, during the brutal fighting at Monte Cassino, soldiers used coffee as a bargaining chip. A packet of instant coffee could buy favors, trade for supplies, or cement friendships with British, Canadian, or even Italian partisan allies. Allied soldiers from different nations bonded over shared coffee, despite language barriers. British soldiers preferred tea, but they appreciated American coffee when it was available. This created opportunities for trade. American coffee for British tea, cigarettes, or chocolate. These exchanges built relationships between Allied forces, strengthening the bonds that held the coalition together. In the Pacific, where heat and humidity made everything miserable, iced coffee became a luxury. Soldiers with access to ice, usually from medical units or Navy ships, would trade valuable items for cold coffee. One Marine recalled trading a Japanese officer's sword, a prized war trophy, for a thermos of iced coffee during the fighting on Okinawa. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, coffee became literally life-saving. American forces, caught off guard by the German offensive, endured brutal winter conditions. Temperatures dropped below zero. Soldiers suffered from hypothermia and frostbite. Hot coffee, when available, provided essential warmth. Units shared their coffee supplies, knowing that warmth might mean the difference between survival and freezing to death. Some soldiers later credited coffee with saving their lives during that desperate winter. Medics used hot coffee to treat hypothermia, understanding that internal warmth was as important as external. The 101st Airborne, surrounded at Bastogne, rationed coffee carefully. Supply drops occasionally included coffee, and these deliveries boosted morale as much as ammunition and medical supplies. When General McAuliffe famously responded "nuts" to German surrender demands, soldiers celebrated with coffee, toasting their defiance. For bomber crews flying missions over Germany and Japan, coffee was part of pre-mission rituals. Crews would gather for briefings at 3 or 4 a.m., drinking coffee while learning about their targets, routes, and expected opposition. Many pilots and crew members carried coffee in thermoses during missions. At high altitude, in unpressurized aircraft at temperatures far below zero, hot coffee was impossible. But even cold coffee provided caffeine to maintain alertness during 8, 10, or 12-hour missions. Lieutenant Colonel James Stewart, yes, the famous actor, who flew B-24 bombers, mentioned in his letters home that coffee before missions was sacrosanct. No matter how early the briefing, coffee was ready. He described the ritual. We'd stand around, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, trying not to think about what we were about to do. The coffee gave us something to hold on to, literally and figuratively. On submarines, space was at an absolute premium, yet coffee pots were essential equipment. Submariners operated in shifts, and coffee flowed continuously. The quality was often terrible, overboiled, sitting on hot plates for hours, but it was constant and reliable. Submarine crews developed elaborate coffee hierarchies. The newest sailors got the worst coffee, the pot that had been sitting longest. Senior crew members got fresh pots. This informal rank structure around coffee reinforced naval traditions while providing caffeine to everyone. In surface warfare, particularly in the Pacific, Navy ships maintained coffee around the clock. The famous MIDRATs, midnight rations, always included fresh coffee for sailors on night watch. During battle stations, coffee stations remained operational when possible, providing quick caffeine boosts during lulls in fighting. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, sailors maintained coffee service even while under attack. Damage control teams fighting fires and flooding below decks were relieved by fresh crews who brought coffee along with replacement equipment. Combat medics carried coffee packets among their supplies. While morphine, bandages, and plasma took priority, coffee served a purpose too. A conscious wounded soldier receiving coffee knew he was being cared for, that he had made it out of immediate danger. Dr. Sarah Klein, an Army nurse who served in field hospitals in France, remembered, "We'd give recovering patients coffee as soon as they could swallow. It wasn't just about the caffeine, it was symbolic. Coffee meant life was continuing. It meant they were going to be okay." Wounded soldiers often requested coffee before morphine, before food, before anything else. Nurses understood this psychological need and accommodated it when possible. The simple act of drinking coffee helped soldiers reconnect with normalcy after traumatic injuries. Legacy and remembrance. When World War II ended in 1945, 16 million Americans began returning home. They brought with them habits, preferences, and memories shaped by their wartime experiences, and many of those centered on coffee. Veterans came home with a taste for instant coffee. While it would never replace fresh brewed coffee in American hearts, instant coffee found a permanent place in American kitchens. Sales of Nescafé, Maxwell House Instant, and other brands soared in the post-war years. Instant coffee became a staple of American pantries, used for quick morning coffee or camping trips. The coffee break, already common in American workplaces, became even more entrenched. Veterans entering the workforce expected and received regular coffee breaks. This helped codify the practice into American labor culture. Union contracts began including formal coffee break provisions, recognizing them as worker rights rather than employer privileges. The post-war economic boom brought expanded coffee culture. Diners multiplied across America, each with bottomless coffee pots. Coffee consumption per capita increased throughout the 1950s and 1960s, reaching peak levels. Americans drank more coffee per person than any other nation on Earth. Truck stop culture emerged, with 24-hour coffee service for long-haul drivers. These roadside establishments, many owned by veterans, recreated the always available coffee culture of military mess halls and Navy ships. Coffee companies benefited enormously from veteran loyalty. Brands that had supplied the military during the war marketed themselves as the coffee that served our troops. Veterans often remained loyal to whatever brand they'd consumed during the war, creating lasting market advantages for companies like Maxwell House and Folgers. Advertising campaigns explicitly targeted veterans. Ads showed soldiers enjoying coffee in combat zones, alongside images of the same men drinking the same brand at home with their families. This emotional connection drove consumer behavior for decades. At VFW halls, American Legion posts, and veterans' reunions, coffee was always present. Veterans gathering to share war stories inevitably did so over coffee. It was continuation of wartime rituals, a connection to shared experiences. These organizations maintained the same around-the-clock coffee availability that veterans had known in the military. Annual reunions of specific units always featured coffee service. Veterans of the 101st Airborne, the 1st Marine Division, or bomber groups would gather, and the first order of business was always making coffee. These rituals honored fallen comrades and reinforced bonds forged in combat. The phrase, "Cup of Joe," became permanently embedded in American English, specifically because of World War II veterans. Young people learned it from fathers and uncles who'd served. It spread through every level of American society. By the 1950s, "Cup of Joe" had become the standard American slang for coffee, used across all demographics and regions. Today, more than 80 years after Pearl Harbor, fewer than 1% of World War II veterans remain alive. But the legacy of their coffee culture endures. The American military still prioritizes coffee. Soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan drank coffee in dining facilities, in Humvees, on remote outposts. Coffee remains part of military rations, evolved from instant packets to more sophisticated instant coffee and individual brewing systems. Modern MREs, meals ready to eat, include instant coffee with creamer and sugar. Soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq had access to espresso machines on major bases, showing how coffee culture evolved while remaining central to military life. At veterans' memorials and cemeteries, coffee is often part of remembrance. Families leave cups of coffee at graves. Veterans' organizations serve coffee at memorial services. It's a way of honoring not just the sacrifice, but the daily experiences of those who served. On Veterans Day and Memorial Day, some families brew coffee and share it at grave sites, telling stories about the veterans they're honoring. This intimate ritual connects past and present, keeping memories alive through the simple act of sharing coffee. American coffee culture today, from specialty cafes to drive-through espresso stands, owes a debt to World War II. The standardization of quality, the acceptance of instant coffee, the proliferation of coffee breaks, all stem partly from wartime experiences. When Americans today stop at a coffee shop before work, or brew a pot at home, or share coffee with friends, they're participating in rituals that were reinforced and expanded by the wartime generation. The ubiquity of coffee in American life, the expectation of quality and availability, the social rituals surrounding it, all bear the influence of World War II. Veterans who survived the war often kept coffee rituals for the rest of their lives. Many could never drink instant coffee again, associating it too strongly with combat trauma. Others preferred it, finding comfort in the familiar taste. Some kept the same coffee-making schedule they'd maintained in the military, waking at dawn for their first cup regardless of actual need. Coffee became a way for veterans to process and remember their experiences. Drinking coffee triggered memories, some painful, some bittersweet, some joyful. These sensory connections helped veterans maintain their identity as members of the wartime generation, part of something larger than themselves. Coffee didn't win World War II by itself. Courage, sacrifice, industrial might, superior strategy, and the dedication of millions of Americans, both in uniform and on the home front, won the war. But coffee was there for every battle, every victory, every loss. It kept soldiers alert during critical moments. It provided comfort during terrible times. It created bonds between people who might never have met otherwise, in foxholes and on ships, in field hospitals and mess tents, in frozen forests and tropical islands. American troops drank coffee. They drank it bad and bitter, weak and strong, hot and cold. They shared it, traded it, treasured it. Coffee marked the rhythm of military life. Morning coffee signaled a new day and new dangers. Afternoon coffee provided a break from monotony or terror. Evening coffee offered warmth and companionship before uncertain nights. And when they came home, they brought that coffee culture with them, transforming America and leaving a legacy that continues today. The coffee shops on every corner, the office coffee breaks, the instant coffee in pantries, the phrase, "cup of joe," all bear the imprint of that wartime generation. So the next time you drink a cup of coffee, remember, you're participating in a tradition shaped by those who served. Every cup connects us to that generation who saved the world, one cup of joe at a time. Remember the soldiers who shared their last coffee packet with a buddy. Remember the nurses who brewed coffee for wounded men. Remember the families who rationed coffee so soldiers could have more. Remember the workers who produced millions of pounds of instant coffee for the war effort. Coffee is more than a beverage. It's a link to history, a connection to sacrifice, a reminder of what Americans can accomplish when united toward a common purpose. That simple cup of coffee carries the weight of history, the memory of heroes, and the legacy of a generation that changed the world.